Hey, how's it going, East Central Illinois? It is 7 o'clock on the dot, and you are tuned into WEFT Champaign 90.1 FM, always streaming live at WEFT.org. And this is My WEFT Show. Thanks for tuning in. A very exciting show today, the most guests I've ever had on one program. We are joined by 3 participants in the upcoming production of the Vagina Monologues, which is taking place on August 25th at the Virginia Theater, and you can find tickets for that on sale now. We can't say prices because it's a community radio. That's one of our rules. But there are tickets on sale at the virginiatheater.org, and it's super cool because it's going to be benefiting CourageConnection.org. Well, Courage Connection, their website's courageconnection.org. So just to allow everyone to get familiar with your voices, can we, starting with Molly, just go down the line, introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Molly McClay, and I'm one of the organizers and actors in the show.
And I'm Reverend Leah Roberts Moser. I'm a local pastor. I'm the pastor of Community United Church of Christ on campus, and I'm also one of the actors in the show.
Hello, my name is Diya and I'm one of the engineers at Wolfram Research, and I'm one of the actors in the production.
Well, thank you all for coming on to My WEFT Show today. And also thank you for taking part in this awesome production for a really cool show, for a awesome, super cool cause. That's a good word for it. Anyway, so just to give us a little bit of background, I'm sure, Molly, you've become very familiar. What is the Vagina Monologues?
Yeah, so it's and feel free to chime in.
Yes,
others as well. It was a play written by the author Eve Ensler, and it is sort of a fictionalized rendition of various different interviews that Eve conducted over the course of years with folks to talk about, specifically women, although the show has become more inclusive over time, to talk about, what their vagina means to them. There's a lot of taboos around even about saying the word vagina. And so the show aims to dispel those sorts of taboos and myths, to talk about pleasure, to talk about empowerment, and also to give voice to the real trauma and pain that people have experienced as a result of violence. So that's kind of, the show has a wide variety of different kinds of monologues, lengths, tones, etc. But we are going to be doing our own rendition of the same monologues that you've created, but our spin on it from Champaign-Urbana.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Your own spin on it. So how is the production set up? Is this like a typical play? Are there costumes? Are there set pieces? Or is it kind of just a person in a microphone?
Should I take this one or someone else?
Do it, Molly.
Okay.
You got this.
So there are many communities that do productions of the Vagina Monologues, and some go very all out with professional actors, costumes, sets, etc. But sort of the original intent of the show is to be for any person to be able to share these monologues. So everyone holds the monologues on note cards with a simple microphone. We might have seating on the stage, with just a simple black backdrop. And we're lucky to have the amazing venue of the Virginia Theater as our backdrop. But other than that, it's a pretty simple setup.
Were you going to add something, Leah?
Yeah, and I was going to say that Molly and January, the other organizer of the program, they were so just spot on in their idea to cast whoever auditioned. So, like, when I walked into the first rehearsal and I saw perhaps maybe one of the most diverse groups of people in this room, this collection of women of all ages and races, and I was just blown away. So it's going to be a really amazing production.
And Leah, I know that you have experience as a pastor standing in front of people and talking, but what about performing a piece? Is that something that you've done before? Do you have experience in this theater realm?
I was on the speech and drama team.
Oh, so you got this.
But yeah, I did a lot of theater as a youth and as a teenager, and did a little bit in college. And worship is theater. It's just we're performing for God. So this is different and it's fun. I also I don't think I've ever said the word vagina in worship. I've certainly never said the F word. But I will on stage on the 25th.
Oh, wow. And Diya, is this your first time performing in front of a group of people?
For acting?
For
since
acting.
the 4th grade, yes.
Oh, okay. Well,
I am well seasoned.
and what other types of experiences have you had? Just presenting in front of large groups of people, anything like that?
I've given various talks to groups, and I grew up playing piano and dancing, and I still perform. So,
in this production, it seems like it's a very emotionally intense experience. And how do you prepare yourself for something like that? If this is kind of a new thing for you.
I know with other productions that I've been in for anything, I tend to perform for the people who I feel like I would be the most embarrassed to perform in front of, like my parents over Skype. I often dance for them. And that's kind of how I get through it. And then I'm like, oh, if I can do it for them, then I can do it for anyone. So I think if I can talk to my dad about reclaiming the word cunt, I can probably do it in front of a bunch of people.
Yes,
that's what the hopes are.
I was going to say we weren't sure if the FCC would allow that word on air, but I'm very lucky that Diya and I are actually in the same monologue, so we are performing that monologue that just got
the group aspect is making it easier for sure.
Okay, so how many monologues in total are being performed? Do you know?
Oh, I probably have to count.
Approximately.
It's probably 20 to 25.
And how many performers have you enlisted for this?
I believe our current number is 68.
Wow. Okay. So are there going to be a few that have multiple performers for one monologue?
Yes. Would you like to talk, Leah, about yours?
Leah.
Yeah, sure. So, so I'm one of. Are there 5 of us? I'm one of 5 people who are performing The Angry Vagina, and our monologue comes at the end of Act 1, and. In casting the play, again, like Molly and January were just really, really smart in the way that they did this, is that there's some of the monologues are their stories, and so there's one person who tells that story. But for instance, the monologue that I'm in, it's more of a reader's theater, and so you hear these different voices voicing how their vagina is angry and why it is that they're angry, and we get fairly specific.
So when you were divvying up the monologues, what was your process for selecting who did what? Was it kind of like a buffet? You could go up and choose which one you wanted to do, or was it more assigned, or did people pick ones that they felt they related to the most?
So it was a casting process that January and I facilitated. So everyone auditioned, and we had 4 monologues available for folks to audition with. And they ranged from like My Angry Vagina to ones that were more serious and sad, ones that were had more like a character appeal to them, ones that were more empowering and happy focused. And then we also had people fill out an audition sheet where they talked about if they had any preferences, if they had any topics they were comfortable addressing or not comfortable. So, some people are not going to feel comfortable moaning on stage. So actually a lot of Vagina Monologues auditions I've done actually require you to do that in the audition. And we didn't want to deter anyone for doing that. But there is a monologue where there are different moans given. So from after we had 2 days worth of auditions at the Champaign Public Library, and from there, January and I were making notes throughout. And It actually was more January than me. She kind of sat down and mapped it all out, and I sort of encouraged some adjustments. And then we've also had a few people leave the cast that we've had to switch around, a little bit of a recasting situation in one monologue. And but it really was based kind of on intuition, and we've been really impressed with how it's kind of played out in terms of people really seeming like it was the right role for them.
So is this the first time you've organized the production of the Vagina Monologues?
Myself, yes.
Is this your first time participating in one?
No, I have been in it before. So the University of Illinois, some of the students put on a yearly production, although this past February they didn't do one. And January and I had both participated, both as staff at the U of I, but also I guess I never participated anywhere else. I almost did when I was in grad school here. But January had been a part of a production in the past that raised a lot of money. And we really wanted to simplify the show with the amount of rehearsals, with the inclusiveness, really focusing on we want as many voices as possible. And so we were able to take our past experiences with the show and sort of come up with this idea. I think the biggest hurdle was like getting the Virginia, which was both easy and challenging.
I think it's amazing that you're in the Virginia Theater because it's this historic venue in downtown Champaign that has some of the biggest events that come through town.
That's true.
And it's going to have the Vagina Monologues. That's huge.
That's true. So we hope we can fill it.
Oh, definitely. Like I said, tickets on sale at thevirginia.org. So, Leah, when you were assigned yours, were you happy with it? Were you familiar with the material before you were assigned it?
I've seen a production actually when I lived in Chicago. I went to see the Vagina Monologues a couple of times. I actually took my mom to see the show. My mom, who would have turned 71 today. My mother, who was a little prudish, but who went because her pastor had gone to see it, and he said that it was both moving and transformative. And so my mom went with me to see the show, and she laughed her head off, and she completely cried. So it's a really important play, and I was so excited when I got my part because it's such a fun part to read. It's such a fun part to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and that was the one you auditioned to also.
It was. I had my fingers crossed. I totally did. And
it worked.
I was telling my niece, who's going to be a freshman in college, about the production and about my part. And my soon-to-be fourth grader was listening, and she said to me, "Well, Mama, why is your character angry?" And I said, "Well, my character is angry because of what happens to women's bodies, and my character says a lot of bad words." And my 9-year-old's face lit up, and she just said, "Mama, that's just like you." And
wow, perfect.
I was like, great casting. Good job. Yay.
And Diya, what about your part? Were you excited when you got the role with the C word that I don't say, but if you want to say it, feel free.
Well, that's why we're reclaiming it, right?
Yeah.
True.
I was. I remember the first time I saw it, it was the monologue which stood out the most because I think there's a lot of sexism in words that we use to against women, and so in this we're taking it back, we're making it ours, we're making it good.
Yes.
Well, cool. And what about you, Molly? So you kind of got to choose, right?
Well, so I actually was initially cast in a different monologue, but because of some different shifts that happened, I ended up giving my part to someone else, and then someone else who was going to be in Reclaiming. Am I allowed to say it on the air?
I don't know. I feel like you
Cunt.
should be able to.
Yes,
You're
'cause we're reclaiming it.
Exactly.
Yes. So, yeah. Oh boy, the FCC is gonna fine us today.
I could get in trouble, but I don't mind. I'm always in trouble.
So anyway, there was a part open on that, and Diya and I are pretty good friends, and I was like, I actually was a little nervous to take on this part because it does have a poetic feel to it, but a lot of people perform it in a really like sexy way, and that's not usually the persona I take on stage. I actually would feel like probably more at home in my angry vagina, which probably was evident when I was practicing. I had to fill in for someone at practice, and I really got into it. I'm like, but I don't want this person to drop out. So anyway, I stepped into that one, which was really kind of was pushing myself out of my comfort zone, and I'm pretty excited about it. And I'm excited to get to perform with Diya. I felt very strongly about the two of you in your specific roles. I remember when you were auditioning, I was writing like my angry vagina as a part next to yours, even though tons of people are auditioning that, and we had talked about you wanting the reclaiming role, and I was very much like, yeah, you should have that. Although I also was thinking the monologue over it, which is about ending rape and rape culture. You would have been really good at that one too.
There's so many in there that would be honored to perform, but honestly I think so much of what's great about this is it's not just such an experience for the audience to be in a room full of people and have kind of question so many of these stereotypes, but also just for performers. And especially, I never thought I'd be able to be in a production because I'm not an actor. But I think just from the discussions we have in rehearsal, it's really empowering for all of us to take on this challenge. And so, while it's personal for everyone, there are certain topics that we may not be comfortable performing. And then we might be doing something we just can't relate to as well, but we all learn from one another in our discussions. And that's kind of what has been making it really great.
Yeah.
And this another positive aspect of this production is that it is benefiting local organization Courage Connection. And so how did that get set up? I know that Eve Ensler did she make it like a rule that if you put the proceeds towards a violence shelter that she doesn't charge you for using the work or something like that?
There are some sort of rules around that. They typically productions are done in February, so in order to sort of not have to pay for the rights, you have to be in February and donating. So we work the February rule, but we had been talking about this for a while, and when Courage Connection had announced that they were really having some financial difficulties, we thought this was the time to do it. As his listeners may know, I've been on the show before talking about another benefit I did for Courage Connection, the Love Handles music release. So, but this one, it's just kind of the Courage Connection summer for me. I didn't mention my role, but I work at the Women's Resources Center on campus. So this work is very close to home for me. And just anything we can do to help out Courage Connection. They're such an important resource, and the themes of the show are really relevant to the cause.
And I was going to bring that up, that even before I met you, I kind of knew your name as being an activist and an advocate in the community. And now that I know you better, I understand that you fight every single day for social justice through your job and your hobbies. And so how is that an influence on your deciding to organize this, on being a part of it? Did all that play a role?
Yeah, I would say so. I think it was definitely a co-led effort on the organizing of it, and I really thank my friend and colleague January for sort of helping convince me that this was possible. But yeah, I've actually used to do theater in high school, and I haven't really done it much since. So I'm usually known for if people know me in the community in any artistic realm, it's either for singing or for doing poetry. So this is sort of a new realm for me, although I will be giving a brief speech at the beginning of the Vagina Monologues, which maybe will feel like what I did at the Women's March. Who knows?
And Leah, when you saw the casting call, when you saw that there were open auditions for a production of the Vagina Monologues in town, benefiting Courage Connection, what were the thoughts that went through your head? Were you immediately on board?
Yeah, I love those old black and white Rodgers and Hart musicals where suddenly there's this there's like a catastrophe in the community, and the next thing you know,
They're putting on a show.
yeah, the next thing you know, Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland are like, "Hey kids, let's put on a show," and then everybody's like, "Yeah!" And I, with my life as a pastor who's an activist, and who works in and around social justice causes, but also with my theater background, it's like the marriage of my two favorite things. Plus, having been on, like in college, I served on the rape crisis team, and this is, all of these things are really near and dear to my heart. And so I was on board immediately. And of course, I checked things out with leaders at my congregation, and they said, well, this is the kind of thing we expect you to do. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to say some things on stage. They're like, yeah, we know, it's fine. So rock on.
And is there a utility in that, to putting a pastor out there and performing in a way that you may not typically see a pastor perform?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. There are some people who have raised their eyebrows and said, "You are a pastor. What are you doing?" I think my grandma actually said, "You're going to get a name for yourself." And I thought to myself, Grandma, I think I already have that name. It is so important that women's stories and trans women's stories are told, and that stories about violence and stories about pleasure, which don't get told, those need to be told. I think the most important story is always the one that we're not hearing. And as a pastor, I tell stories all the time. I tell ancient stories and recast those in a way that help people connect the stories of their lives to these ancient stories. And so it's not that dissimilar from what I do on an everyday basis.
Well, that's cool. And Diya, I understand that you're organizer with the Young Democrats. You helped put on the Women's March. That was such a huge success last winter, springtime. It was truly one of the most amazing events that I have been to in this community. It was, tears in my eyes, especially during Molly's speech. It was amazing. So the speeches given there at the gazebo at Westside Park and at Cowboy Monkey, how do you feel those relate, and what are the similarities between those and the monologues which are performed during this production?
Well, so many of the speeches covered a variety of topics. While the Women's March was focused much more on politics and kind of general ideas, I think what's important about the Vagina Monologues is it brings a lot of humanity and personal experience. And it's one thing to talk anecdotally about the problems that we face as women in society, but it's another to actually hear those stories. And because of the way that our community has raised women, in general, there's so much shame brought to topics which are okay for men to talk about, such as sexual pleasure and violence. Like domestic violence is something we just don't talk about. It's not acceptable. And we're taught to, when these things happen, to just be quiet. And so, it's very empowering. And similar to the Women's March, as we try to be intersectional with all races and LGBTQ, we do the same with the Vagina Monologues. And I think what's great about it is that it's this evolving topic. So as these different communities emerge, they get included.
Definitely. And could I jump onto that just a little bit?
Yeah.
Because I think the Vagina Monologues have sort of faced some critique over the years, and I think with good reason, that it is a white cisgender woman with a lot of privilege writing the stories of people who've been more marginalized. And there are some, and that there is also this sort of equating woman with vagina that we really have been trying to get away from, but also recognize that it's sort of embedded into the material itself. So some of the ways that we've gone about making shifts there are just recognizing that when we have a story from the perspective of a woman of color, that we want women of color to tell that story. That when we have a story about trans women, that we want trans actors to tell that story. And those are some, and then we're going to recognize before the production begins some of the problematic elements. There's a particular monologue that deals with childhood sexual abuse, and there's aspects of that are I think could be missed by some audience members if we don't highlight a little bit more. So, but I think that, part of the way we found cast members, like Diya and I met through the Women's March, and I invited many of the people who spoke with me to be a part of the Vagina Monologues. Many of them were not available, but because that was such an inclusive event in terms of the speakers that we had, that gave, there was one avenue in which we found really a diverse set of voices. And it's really cool to see people, some of my students that I work with at U of I are in this production, and people I just randomly know in the community, and just all these different pockets of the community, getting to see those people interact with one another, colleagues, friends, fellow musicians, students. It's really great.
I was going to ask about that. I was going to ask about how...
Just went right into your question.
Perfect segue. So how has being part of this production, I'll open this up to everyone. We can go from Molly to Diya. How has being part of this production kind of maybe strengthened your bond, or maybe changed your perspective on anything, or strengthened your perspective on anything? So I'm sure there have been rehearsals where you have, delivered these monologues in front of each other, and I'm guessing it was a powerful thing, and I was just wondering how it has affected you so far, even before the opening night.
I'm okay with not starting this one since I just spoke.
Okay. Leah?
So again, like I'm in one of the monologues that's been divvied up amongst several voices, and our group had a conversation about what it is that we're saying and the ways in which people were rehearsing. And it was so empowering to listen to people talk about finding the voice that they have so that they can be brave. And I think we live in a time where courage is pretty important. And so watching people move in the rehearsal process from being meek and being embarrassed, or being not willing to put it all out there, right? When I was in college, Doc Evans would always yell at me and say, "You're not putting it all out there." And to see people be able to put it all out there and be so courageous in what they're doing, I think that is something. It's one of the ways in which theater is transformational, right? It's not just what happens on stage. It's something that we do in our lives. And again, I think particularly in these days in which we live, it's really important to watch that modeled.
For sure. Diya?
Just definitely echoing what Leah said. It's funny, you go into this large group of women who you don't know that well, and you get up and you rehearse these monologues in front of them, and suddenly you feel so much closer to them because you're saying things you don't say to anybody else, and that you don't talk about with anybody else. And so it creates a dynamic where you can share personal experiences and give feedback from a personal level on topics where other people may not be so familiar. And I know I did that once in rehearsal, and it was, I said things that I've never said to a group of people and to most people in my life.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah, for me, I spend a lot of my time talking about these topics in my job, and facilitating conversations with students and helping them feel comfortable facilitating conversations with others. So I think that I'm coming into it with less of a learning curve, or at least not learning curve, but just feeling a comfort curve, I guess, with this. But even so, there are certain ways of presenting topics that I don't really engage in at work. And, the idea of performing Reclaiming Cunt in front of anyone from, my supervisor, my former supervisor who just retired, is actually giving the intro to that piece. My students, I hope my mom will come from Springfield. That's my biggest goal, is to get my mom to come. It's a little, I have actually an easier time being vulnerable around people I do not know. So when the lights are on, or when it's pitch black audience at the Virginia, I'm going to probably feel more comfortable than I will with anybody else around. But I mean, during practice, everybody gets to see like me sort of wrestle with this, and that's something that I can, like, me sort of wrestling my way through the piece and like trying to perfect it, and that's something I don't normally put on display to other people. But on the flip side, I think it's just, as I mentioned, it's been really cool to see the different connections being made with a lot of people I already know. For so many of the cast members, like, I know aspects of their story, and to see some of them interact with each other and sort of get connected, it's been just like, I said, like, and I'm like, oh, I love this, basically.
Well, that's awesome. And beyond the cast that's there with you, going through this with you, how do you hope it affects the audience that experiences it for the first time that one night? This is going to be my first time watching the Vagina Monologues, and I thought about watching it on YouTube. I thought, no, I want the first time to be with faces I know.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering what you perceive that experience to be like, or what you hope it will be like.
Well, as a sidebar, I learned from January that Ensler prohibits people from taking videos. So all those YouTube videos are breaking the rules a little
There's
bit.
a lot of them.
But I mean, not like I didn't, consult like 10 of them to get different ideas on how to perform mine. But I don't know. What do any of you want to start?
So, putting my pastor hat on for a second, there's a power in naming things. I'm thinking back to the name blessing ceremonies that we've had for transgender people at the church, and there's such a power in naming them with their new name publicly for the first time, and it's one of the transformational things in the Vagina Monologues is that we name things that do not get named out loud very often in our culture and in our world, and so that changes people. It's changing the actors. It will change everybody who comes to see it.
And Diya, how do you hope this affects women in the audience and just all the community members there in general?
I hope women especially feel empowered. I think it's so important. It's very easy to hear the title and think, that's interesting. In fact, I get that a lot when I tell people I'm in this. But there are some people who don't know what it's actually about. And if you even just Google it and read the Wikipedia page, you understand it's not what you expected. And I really don't know anybody who's come out of there without feeling like, I had never thought about that. I learned so many things, and feels like their perspective on women and all of these issues have been changed.
You're making me so excited.
Yeah, I remember reading the Vagina Monologues for the first time in undergrad in my first gender and women's studies class. And I feel like it's just one of those things that everyone should experience once. Because, I can't, it's been a bit, and I was having a lot of enlightenment that semester from that class. I think it was one of the major reasons why I ended up in the job that I have now is through taking classes on gender and women's studies issues. But I think, that particular piece, I think, was really eye-opening for me. I think I read it over spring break at my parents' house, and I think that they probably, my dad probably, scoffed at, the book, and I'm like, this is important stuff. And I, about every 5 years of my life, I, revisit it in some way, whether it's auditioning or being in a production, reading it again. So I don't remember what the question was, but I think everyone should have an experience with it, and I think to critique it is important too, and recognize some of the ways that it fails or the limitations of it, but also recognizing that it's a step towards someone's feminist awakening. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And I just want to throw out all the info on it again. So it's taking place August 25th at 7:30 p.m. at the Virginia Theater. You can find tickets at thevirginia.org, and it's benefiting Courage Connection, which is one of the best organizations that we have in town. We can't take it for granted. We have to keep supporting it because it can be gone just like that, just like a lot of the fantastic organizations that we have in this town. And I just want to say thank you one more time to Molly, Leah, Diya, coming in, talking about your parts in the Vagina Monologues, and making me super duper excited to go check it out.
Yeah, can I give my one last pitch, which I always
Yes,
do at the
do it.
rehearsals, is that if everyone invites 10 people to this show, we'll fill half. Well, if everyone in the cast did that, we'd fill half the Virginia Theater. So every person listening to the show should invite 10 people to the show, and then we'll be well on our way to, filling the Virginia, which is what we want to do because we want to raise the most money for Courage Connection possible.
Yeah. Are you trying to do it again?
What?
Are you trying to put on the show again? Is this going to be like an annual thing?
Oh gosh. Well, maybe. I mean, I think that we hope that the U of I students will pick it up again. But there was something really powerful about doing this beyond the campus.
I agree.
And I would love to see it happen again. So
show up, invite your friends, make it your hobby, your job to get people to the Virginia on August 25th. Buy the tickets now, and so. Thank you all for coming in. I'm gonna play a song now. I know that Molly's a big fan of Tara Tara, one of my favorite local acts. One of my maybe my top 10 favorite songs is their cover of Hum's Apollo. I got it on a cassette put out by Sean Newman of Ghost Track, and it was also put out by Airship Records, and it's absolutely beautiful. So we're going to listen to that and say goodbye to our guests, and we'll be back with more of My WEFT Show after that.
I'm thinking of a number between everything and 2. I'm thinking of a number between everything and 2.